Good evening. The message from Ottawa tonight could not be clearer. Canada has a new leader, and that leader has no intention of following the conciliatory path that defined his predecessor's approach to Washington. Mark Carney, the former central banker who now leads Canada, has drawn a line that Justin Trudeau never drew. He has matched American tariffs with Canadian tariffs. He has met threats with counterthreats. He has told Canadians that their country will not be bullied, will not be bought, and will certainly not become the 51st state of the United States of America. The transformation in Canadian politics over the past year has been remarkable to witness. Justin Trudeau, who led Canada for nearly a decade, attempted to manage the Trump administration through diplomacy, personal relationships, and careful negotiation. He absorbed insults. He made concessions. He sought compromise even when compromise meant accepting terms that many Canadians found humiliating. In the end, it was not enough. The pressure from Washington only intensified, and Trudeau's approach came to be seen by many Canadians as weakness rather than wisdom. Trudeau announced his resignation as Liberal Party leader in January of last year, acknowledging that he had become an obstacle to his party's success and perhaps to his country's ability to respond effectively to American pressure. The search for his replacement brought forward several candidates, but one stood out from the beginning. Mark Carney, the internationally respected economist who had led both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, who had advised governments and international institutions on financial stability and climate policy, who had never held elected office but commanded respect across the political spectrum. Carney's entry into politics was not inevitable. He had built a distinguished career in the private sector and public service without ever running for election. He had been mentioned as a potential political leader for years, but he had always declined, preferring the technical work of central banking and international finance to the rough and tumble of electoral politics. What changed his mind, by his own account, was watching the escalating American assault on Canadian sovereignty and concluding that his country needed leadership that could stand toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. The contrast between Carney and Trudeau could hardly be more stark. Trudeau was a career politician, the son of a former prime minister, a man who had spent his adult life in the public eye and who possessed considerable personal charm but limited experience in business or economics. Carney is the opposite. He spent years at Goldman Sachs before moving into central banking. He managed the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis with a steady hand that earned international praise. He became the first non-British citizen to lead the Bank of England in its more than 300-year history. He understands global finance at a level that few political leaders anywhere in the world can match. This background matters because the confrontation with the United States is fundamentally an economic confrontation. Trump has deployed tariffs as his primary weapon against Canada. He has threatened Canadian industries with devastating levies designed to force concessions on trade, on border security, on energy policy, and perhaps on sovereignty itself. Responding to this assault requires someone who understands how economies actually work, how trade flows can be redirected, how financial pressure can be applied and resisted. Carney understands these things in ways that Trudeau never could. The new Prime Minister's approach became clear from his first days in office. Where Trudeau had spoken of finding common ground with the United States, Carney spoke of defending Canadian interests. Where Trudeau had emphasized the friendship between the two countries, Carney emphasized that friendship requires mutual respect, and that respect had been notably absent from Washington's approach. Where Trudeau had absorbed American tariffs and sought negotiated solutions, Carney announced immediate retaliatory measures designed to impose equivalent pain on American exporters. The retaliation has been carefully calibrated to maximize political impact in the United States. Canadian tariffs have targeted products from states whose congressional representatives are considered vulnerable. American agricultural exports to Canada, worth billions of dollars annually, now face levies that make them uncompetitive with products from other countries. American manufactured goods that once flowed freely across the border now encounter barriers that add costs and delays. The message to American politicians is unmistakable. There is a price to be paid for attacking Canada, and their constituents will pay it. But tariffs are only the beginning of Canada's response under Carney's leadership. The Prime Minister has made clear that Canada possesses leverage that extends far beyond the ability to tax American imports. Canada supplies the United States with enormous quantities of oil and natural gas. Canadian crude flows through pipelines to American refineries that have been configured specifically to process it. Canadian natural gas heats American homes and powers American industries across the northern tier of states. Replacing these energy supplies would be difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. Carney has not threatened to cut off American energy supplies. Such a threat would be economically damaging to Canada as well as the United States, and it would represent an escalation that could spiral into truly dangerous territory. But he has made pointed references to the energy relationship in his public statements. He has noted that Canada has options for its energy exports. Asian markets are hungry for Canadian oil and gas. New pipeline and export terminal projects that had been stalled for years are now receiving expedited approval. The implication is clear without being explicit. Canada can survive without the American energy market. Whether America can easily survive without Canadian energy is another question. The critical minerals issue may be even more significant in the long term. Canada possesses vast deposits of the rare earth elements and other minerals that are essential to modern technology. Electric vehicle batteries, smartphones, computer chips, wind turbines, solar panels, and countless other products depend on materials that Canada has in abundance and that the United States largely lacks. China currently dominates global production of many critical minerals, a situation that American policymakers have identified as a strategic vulnerability. Canada could be the obvious alternative supplier, a friendly neighbor with reliable rule of law and shared values. Could be. Under Trudeau, Canada was moving toward closer integration with the United States on critical mineral supply chains. Under Carney, that integration is being reconsidered. The Prime Minister has suggested that Canada will develop its critical mineral resources in partnership with countries that treat Canada with respect. He has initiated discussions with European nations, with Japan, with South Korea, with other democracies that might welcome access to Canadian minerals as an alternative to Chinese dependence. The United States remains a potential partner, but only if the relationship is rebuilt on a foundation of mutual benefit rather than American coercion. Water is another source of Canadian leverage that Carney has been willing to discuss publicly. The Great Lakes system, shared between the two countries, provides drinking water to some 40 million Americans. The St. Lawrence Seaway, jointly operated by both nations, connects the American industrial heartland to the Atlantic Ocean. The Columbia River Treaty, which governs water flows from Canada into the Pacific Northwest, comes up for renegotiation periodically. None of these water relationships are in immediate danger, but Carney has made clear that cooperative management of shared water resources depends on a cooperative overall relationship. If the United States insists on treating Canada as an adversary, Canada will have to consider what that means for all aspects of the bilateral relationship. The rhetorical shift from Ottawa has been as striking as the policy shift. Trudeau, even when frustrated with American demands, maintained a tone of diplomatic politeness that sometimes seemed disconnected from the provocations he was responding to. When Trump called him weak and dishonest, Trudeau responded with measured disagreement. When American officials suggested that Canada should become part of the United States, Trudeau treated the comments as jokes not worthy of serious response. Carney has taken a different approach. He has met Trump's provocations with direct and forceful rebuttals. When the American president renewed his suggestions about Canada becoming the 51st state, Carney responded that Canada is a sovereign nation that has been independent for more than 150 years and will remain independent for the next 150 years and beyond. He noted that Canada fought alongside the United States in 2 world wars, in Korea, in Afghanistan, and in countless other conflicts, not as a subordinate territory, but as an independent ally. He suggested that Americans who do not understand the difference between an ally and a vassal should consult a dictionary. This willingness to push back has resonated with the Canadian public. Polls consistently show that Canadians are tired of being bullied and want their government to stand firm. The anti-American sentiment that has grown in Canada over the past year is unlike anything seen in generations. Canadians who once viewed their southern neighbor with friendly affection now express frustration, anger, and in some cases contempt. Tourism from Canada to the United States has fallen sharply. Canadian consumers are actively avoiding American products. Buy Canadian campaigns have sprouted across the country, with businesses advertising their Canadian ownership as a selling point. Carney has channeled this nationalist sentiment while trying to prevent it from becoming destructive. He has emphasized repeatedly that Canada's quarrel is with the current American administration, not with the American people. He has noted that millions of Americans oppose their government's approach to Canada and deserve Canadian friendship and solidarity. He has welcomed American tourists and businesses, even while imposing tariffs on American goods. The line he walks is delicate but important. Canada cannot afford a complete rupture with its largest trading partner, but it also cannot accept the subordinate position that Washington seems to want to impose. The economic diversification strategy that Carney has outlined represents a fundamental reorientation of Canadian trade policy. For generations, Canada has been overwhelmingly dependent on the American market. Roughly 3/4 of Canadian exports go to the United States. The Canadian economy is deeply integrated with American supply chains. This integration has brought prosperity, but it has also created vulnerability. A country that depends on a single market for 3/4 of its exports has limited leverage when that market turns hostile. Carney has announced a comprehensive effort to reduce Canadian dependence on the United States. Trade missions have been dispatched to Europe, to Asia, to Latin America, seeking new markets for Canadian products and new sources for Canadian imports. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the European Union, which came into force several years ago, is being promoted aggressively as an alternative to American trade. Negotiations with the United Kingdom, with India, with the members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, are being accelerated. The goal, Carney has said, is to ensure that no single country ever again has the leverage over Canada that the United States has today. This diversification will take time. Trade relationships built over decades cannot be redirected overnight. Canadian businesses that have configured their operations around American supply chains will need years to develop alternative arrangements. The infrastructure for exporting Canadian products to Asian markets, including pipelines, ports, and shipping capacity, remains inadequate and will require massive investment to expand. Carney has acknowledged these challenges while insisting that the long-term direction is clear. Canada must become less dependent on the United States, whatever the short-term costs of that transition. The domestic political landscape has shifted dramatically in response to these events. Carney led the Liberal Party to a stronger-than-expected performance in the recent federal election, winning a mandate to continue his confrontational approach to Washington. The Conservative Party, which had initially criticized Carney's tough stance as economically reckless, found itself outflanked by nationalist sentiment and has now largely aligned itself with the Prime Minister's position. The New Democratic Party has supported the Liberal government on matters related to the American dispute, creating an unusual degree of cross-partisan unity. This unity reflects the depth of Canadian feeling on the sovereignty issue. Whatever Canadians may think about domestic policy questions, about taxation or healthcare, or environmental regulation, they are united in rejecting American suggestions that their country should cease to exist as an independent nation. The 51st state rhetoric from Washington has done more to unite Canadians than any domestic political leader could have accomplished. It has made defending Canadian sovereignty the defining political issue of the moment, and Carney has positioned himself as the defender-in-chief. The international community has largely sided with Canada in this dispute. European leaders have expressed support for Canadian sovereignty and concern about American protectionism. The European Union has indicated willingness to accelerate trade negotiations with Canada and to provide alternative markets for Canadian products excluded from the United States by tariffs. Japan, South Korea, Australia, and other American allies have quietly signaled their discomfort with Washington's approach, even as they avoid direct confrontation with the Trump administration. This international support matters both symbolically and practically. Symbolically, it reinforces Canada's position that it is the United States, not Canada, that has departed from the norms of international behavior. Practically, it provides Canada with economic alternatives that reduce the leverage of American tariffs. If Canadian lumber cannot enter the United States without prohibitive duties, it can be sold to European or Asian buyers instead. If Canadian manufactured goods are blocked from American markets, they can find customers elsewhere. The American market is enormous, but it is not the only market in the world. Carney has also moved to strengthen Canada's defensive capabilities in response to American pressure. The Canadian military budget, long criticized as inadequate by American officials, is being increased substantially. New investments in Arctic sovereignty, in naval capabilities, in continental defense are being announced. Carney has framed these investments not as concessions to American demands, but as necessary measures for an independent nation facing an uncertain security environment. If the United States cannot be relied upon as an ally, Canada must be prepared to defend itself. The NORAD agreement, which has integrated Canadian and American air defenses for decades, remains in force, but its future is being questioned in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Canadian officials have begun discussing whether the deep integration of continental defense serves Canadian interests if the United States views Canada not as a partner, but as a potential acquisition target. These discussions remain preliminary, but they reflect a fundamental reassessment of the bilateral relationship that extends beyond trade into security and defense. The personal dynamic between Carney and Trump has been notably hostile. Trump has attacked Carney repeatedly on social media, calling him names and questioning his competence. Carney has responded with pointed criticism of his own, questioning Trump's understanding of economics and international relations. The two leaders have not met in person since Carney took office, and there is no summit scheduled. Communications between Ottawa and Washington have been downgraded to lower levels, with foreign ministers and trade representatives handling matters that would once have been addressed by heads of government directly. This personal hostility worries some observers who fear that the absence of leader-to-leader communication could lead to miscalculation and escalation. Others argue that Carney's willingness to match Trump's aggression is exactly what the situation requires. Trudeau's attempts at personal diplomacy with Trump ultimately failed to prevent the current crisis, they note. Perhaps a leader who refuses to play the game of personal flattery will be more effective in defending Canadian interests. The economic costs of the dispute are mounting on both sides of the border. Canadian exports to the United States have fallen significantly since the escalation of tariffs. American exports to Canada have fallen by a similar amount. Border communities that depended on cross-border trade and tourism are suffering. Manufacturing supply chains that once moved seamlessly across the border are being disrupted. Prices for consumers in both countries are rising as tariffs add costs to imported goods. These costs create pressure for resolution, but they also create political dynamics that make resolution difficult. In the United States, admitting that tariffs have been economically damaging would require the administration to acknowledge failure. In Canada, accepting American terms after the public has been rallied to resist would be politically devastating for any leader who agreed. The two countries are locked in a confrontation that neither can easily exit, even as both bear increasing costs from continuing it. Carney has indicated willingness to negotiate, but only on terms that respect Canadian sovereignty and equality. He has rejected any negotiation that begins with American demands and Canadian concessions. He has insisted that any resolution must address the fundamental disrespect that has characterized American treatment of Canada. Words matter, he has said. You cannot call a country weak and dishonest, suggest that it should be absorbed into your own nation, impose punitive tariffs on its products, and then expect that country to negotiate as if nothing has happened. The path forward remains unclear. The Trump administration shows no sign of moderating its approach to Canada. Carney shows no sign of backing down from his confrontational stance. The tariffs remain in place on both sides. The diplomatic relationship remains frozen. The economic damage continues to accumulate. And 40 million Americans who depend on Great Lakes water shared with Canada, along with millions more who heat their homes with Canadian natural gas and fill their cars with Canadian oil, wait to see whether their leaders can find a way out of a conflict that serves no one's interests. What is clear is that Canada under Mark Carney is not the Canada that existed under Justin Trudeau. The new Prime Minister has transformed his country's approach to the United States in ways that may prove irreversible regardless of how the current dispute is ultimately resolved. The deep integration of the two economies that developed over decades is being questioned. The assumption that Canada and the United States would always be close allies is being challenged. The possibility that the two countries might become genuine adversaries, something that would have seemed absurd just a few years ago, can no longer be dismissed. Carney has bet his political future on the proposition that Canadians want a leader who will stand up to American pressure rather than accommodate it. So far, that bet appears to be paying off. His approval ratings remain strong. His party holds power. His approach commands cross-partisan support. The Canadian public, whatever doubts they may have about the economic costs of confrontation, appears to prefer a prime minister who fights to one who appeases. Whether this confrontational approach will ultimately serve Canadian interests better than Trudeau's diplomacy remains to be seen. The economic costs are real and growing. The long-term damage to the bilateral relationship may take generations to repair. The possibility of further escalation, with consequences that neither side can fully predict, cannot be ruled out. But for now, Canada has a leader who has made clear that he will not back down. Mark Carney came to politics late in life, after a career that took him to the heights of international finance and gave him a perspective on global economics that few political leaders possess. He came because he believed his country was in danger and needed someone who could stand against that danger. He has stood. Whether that standing will prove to be wisdom or folly, courage or recklessness, only time will tell. The one thing that can be said with certainty is that the relationship between Canada and the United States will never return to what it was before this crisis began. The trust has been broken. The assumptions have been shattered. The institutions that once managed the relationship smoothly are under strain as never before. Whatever comes next, it will be different from what came before. Mark Carney has made sure of that. And unlike his predecessor, he shows no sign of blinking. That is our report for this evening. The confrontation between Canada and the United States continues. A new leader in Ottawa has chosen a path of resistance rather than accommodation. The consequences of that choice are still unfolding, for both nations and for the millions of people whose lives depend on a relationship that was once the closest in the world and is now something else entirely. Thank you for joining us. Good night.